My name's Mike. I'm one of the pastors. Those of you worshiping online, it's great to be with you wherever and whenever you're worshiping with us. I hope you'll let us know you're worshiping with us. And if I haven't had a chance to meet you, I met a few new people this morning. Please say hi after worship. I don't know if this is anybody ever feels this way, those of you online. I've been running around, like feeling a little scattered today. And so, Bethany, thanks for praying. I needed a minute to breathe. And wherever you are, whatever's going on in your life that you come here with, I hope you'll experience a little grace and permission to breathe today. We are in week 2 of a conversation about one of the Old Testament characters that maybe you heard about when you were a kid. Maybe you're like, I think I heard about, this. And yet what you think you know, I suspect isn't what really you need to know. I don't know if that makes sense. But we're going to talk about Jonah. We're in a conversation. Jonah, who is the worst prophet ever. And you're going to hear this over the next several weeks. We're in week 2. We have 2 more weeks to go. And people are like, I love this book. My favorite week is probably week 4, although week 3 is great. Although I like this week too, but don't get me wrong. Like, way to bury the lead, like, meh. All right. So last week when we introduced it, I described Jonah as written as satire. And a few people asked me this week, wait, what do you mean by satire? And satire is using humor or exaggeration to criticize someone or something's faults. And this may be hard for you to imagine, especially about a story about fish. But sometimes people tell exaggerated fishing stories, right? In fact, that's what we hear in Jonah, is almost everything that you think is going to happen, the opposite happens. And the things that do happen are almost always over-exaggerated, over the top, at times even comical. And so we're digging deep into it. But the next question then somebody asked is, well, do you think Jonah actually really happened? And I say yes. Although I think some version of it happened, because there is something so human about Jonah's story that not only I think happened to him, but his story connects with my story, and I suspect it connects with your story too. So I want to tell you a little bit about it. If you missed out last week, here's a brief recap. I'm going to put up a map. I'm not going to, our back booth will. Thank you, back booth, for putting up the map. Jonah begins, is first mentioned actually in 2 Kings 14, whenever we learn that Jonah was a real prophet that ministered during the time of King Jeroboam II. Now, King Jeroboam II was more than a little sketch. God kind of rebuked him, corrected him, and yet Jonah was a big fan of Jeroboam II and shared something in common with him. They both hated the Assyrian Empire. So God called Jonah to go to Nineveh, which is the capital of Assyria. And here's why I call this satire. God calls Jonah, the person that hates Assyria most, to go to the people he hates the most. And it's probably hard for you to imagine. But if you're a Jesus follower, Jesus has the audacity to tell us that we need to love our enemies. We need to pray for people who hurt us. And by the way, I need to add an asterisk. Pray good things for people that hurt you. And so that's why I say Jonah's story is not only, I think, real for him, but this is a story that I feel and probably you feel, because there's all people we hate, right? Okay, you're in church, you're like, I don't hate anybody, Pastor Mike. I dislike them in a way that makes my skin crawl. Well, that's who God's calling us to do. What does it mean to go to and share God's message of hope for people that we find it hard to love, hard to be around, and hate, even though we don't want to say hate? So Jonah says, yeah, God, I'm not doing that. I'm going to actually go the back door, the exact opposite way. But he doesn't only go the opposite way. He goes to, in the exaggerated story, satire, the most furthest place in the ancient world, the opposite of Nineveh. You can see it's Tarshish. Tarshish existed literally on the edge of the world. And so if he went any further, he would fall off the edge. And whenever he was there, this epic storm, which once again was probably exaggerated, and Jonah's asleep in the bottom of the boat. He doesn't notice. But finally, the sailors who become followers of God, even though Jonah never tells them about God, more satire, throw him into the sea, throw him into the depth of the sea, and he's swallowed by a giant fish. And it says at the end of chapter 1, God sends a great fish to swallow Jonah. Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, if you missed out on any of it, we talked all about that first chapter last week. You can go back and catch online. But we're picking up today with Jonah chapter 2. Hear these words. Satire. Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of a fish. I called out to the Lord in my distress, and he answered me. From the belly of the underworld I cried out for help. You have heard my voice. You cast me into the depths of the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounds me. All your strong waves and rushing water pass over me. So I said, I've been driven away from your sight. Will I ever look on your holy temple? Waters have grasped me to the point of death. The deep surrounds me. Seaweed is wrapped around my head. At the base of the undersea mountains, I have sunk down to the underworld. Its bars held me with no end in sight. But you brought me out of the pit. When my endurance was weakening, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you, to your holy temple. Those deceived by worthless things had their chance for mercy, lose their chance for mercy. But me, I will offer sacrifice to you with the voice of thanks. That which I have promised I will pay. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah into the dry land. This is the word of God for all of God's creation. Thanks be to God. So, let's talk about the prayer. Because I love this prayer, and I suspect that maybe you've prayed some version of this prayer for yourself, and if you haven't, at some point in your life, you're going to find yourself in a pit, in a place where you're going to look for what God is doing and trying to make sense of your situation. So I want to pick out a couple things. First, why is Jonah in the pit to begin with? Why is he in the belly of the fish? Now, if you heard the prayer, by the way, you can follow along with us. Just open your Bibles. It's on your phones probably to Jonah chapter 2. What Jonah says at the beginning of the prayer is, God, you cast me into the sea. Is that really what happened? I mean, kind of. Like, yes, maybe God caused him to go into the sea to calm the storm, but why was he in the middle of the sea to begin with? It was his choice, right? He's there because he's running away from God. And I think that's important because sometimes you all probably don't do this. You all don't do this, but maybe you know a friend who blames their circumstances on God. Like they eat out fast food constantly, fried foods, add more salt to their fries or popcorn. They don't go exercise and then ask, God, how can you give how can you give my friend heart disease? Or maybe somebody, a friend who works too much, doesn't spend time with their spouse, and then wonders, why is God not miraculously keeping their marriage together? Or they spend money on all the newest toys and all the newest gadgets, clothes, cars, whatever it is, and then wonder, why am I poor, God? Why? Not that you all would do that, but somebody Have you ever found yourself like blaming somebody blaming their circumstances on God? And all the while, this is true for me, that there are some times, and I don't mean to diminish this, relationships, finances, health, those things are complicated. And sometimes you experience bad things, not because of anything you did wrong, but simply because of the world we live in. Sometimes bad things just happen, like in schools that we see this week. And I'm not talking about those. But sometimes we find ourselves in the middle of a mess because of the choices we make. And specifically in my life, I find myself in the mess because I'm not doing the things that God wants me to do or calls me to do or asks me to do. And oftentimes I'm running in the exact opposite direction. And then I wonder, why is my life a mess? And it's not God's fault, right? It's my fault. Because I think most of us have this idea that we expect life to go up and to the right. We expect things to continue to get better and better and better. You know that term, up and to the right? There's a graph that shows it. Anybody know what that graph is? Stock market, the Dow Jones since 1900. It's gone pretty well, right? And we think our lives should be going that way. What we ignore is sometimes you'll notice there's some dips along there, right? There's some dips. And sometimes those dips just happen, but more often than not in my life, and maybe in your life, those dips are caused by me not doing the very things that God asks me to do or wants me to do or calls me to do. And what I know is I want my life to go up and to the right, but so often, because of my choices, I go low, 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 low. Last week I quoted Jelly Roll. This week I'm quoting Flo Rida. Next week I'm taking requests. There you go. You can email me at Gina_Brinkman. And what I want to say is simply that Jonah is in the middle of his mess because of the choices he made, not because of God, but because of his choices not to listen to God. And that's true for all of us. But the second part of this, in the ancient world, the place he finds himself in, this is an interesting note, he finds himself in the middle of the sea. And in the ancient world, they didn't think the sea had a bottom. Do you know why they didn't think that? Because nobody had ever been to the bottom. They thought it was like it would just go down low, low, low into, some cultures called it the abyss. In the Hebrew word, the word is the Sheol. Say that with me, Sheol. The word Sheol can be translated as the pit or the grave or hell. So whenever Jonah says, from the belly of the underworld, Sheol, I cried out for help, he's really saying from the pit of hell, from my watery grave, I cry out for help. And why is he here? He's here because he's been running away from God, and yet he realizes in Sheol he needs God desperately. One of the most powerful spiritual groups I know of and I've seen consistently is a 12-step program. If you've been through a 12-step program, or if you know anybody who's been through a 12-step program, AA, NA, any of the recovery programs, you know that often a common denominator in many people's stories, they have this Sheol moment. They call it hitting rock bottom. It's this place of desperation. It's this place of powerlessness. It's this place of saying, I need help, and I can't do it on my own, and I need a higher power to help me out. And I think this is Jonah's 12-step program of him hitting rock bottom and turning to God for help. And here's the second lesson I want to point out, that God is there, even in rock bottom, even in Sheol. And this is my experience, and maybe this is true for you, but sometimes the times that I experience God most powerfully are those dips in my life, those bottom moments. And part of it isn't that God's there more powerfully, it's that I'm aware and willing to seek out God more desperately. because I can't turn to any of my own devices, to any of my own gods, to any of my own abilities. I have to turn and look for God's help. And I think this is important because some of us may be at one of those moments right now. Or maybe you just got out of one of those moments and you're looking for, I need it to go up because I'm not sure it can go any further down. And it's to know that God is there even in Sheol. Think about that. This is like theologically, I'm not sure I should say this in church, and yet I like the image. That even in Jonah's hell, even in his Sheol, that God is there. And even in your hell, that God is there working and inviting you to something better. One of the things I noticed about Jonah's Sheol this week, this was new for me, is that the fish was actually a gift, not a punishment. Did you notice that? So Jonah's perception of the fish was, in the watery grave, I'm in a prison. There's no way out. But think about it for a second. The reason Jonah's in the pit, the reason Jonah's in Sheol is because he's running away from God. And God actually sends a fish to do what? To protect him from the water, to care for him in the storm, to allow him to live for 3 days and 3 nights in what could have been a death sentence, right? He perceived the fish as a punishment, but God actually gave the fish as a gift. I wonder how many times, as you look back to your life at those moments whenever you're down, whenever you're at your bottom, whenever you're searching, that you didn't realize it at the moment, but God is acting to protect you, not punish you, right? Isn't that going back to 12-step program? Many people who have been through a 12-step program, they go to a rehab facility and they think it's punishment. And they don't realize until years later it's the healing that they desperately needed, but were so unwilling to choose for themselves. It was a fish that God provided, and they didn't realize how healing and hopeful and helpful it would be. I don't know if that's your story, but I think that's Jonah's story. God provided this fish and as an offering of grace to help Jonah in the moment that he needed the most. The other thing I think is powerful about the fish is this is finally the moment where he hears God's voice. Do you know why he hears God's voice in the fish? Because he can't do anything else. There's no people around to talk to. There's no noise around to listen to. He doesn't even have his cell phone to play Candy Crush on. Maybe he has his cell phone, but it's drained out of energy or he can't play with, you know. How many times do we look for that thing to distract us? And all the while, God's waiting for us, just waiting and ready. Did you notice in Jonah's prayer, he said, in my desperation, I love that word. It was at his emptiness, whenever he tried all of the rest, he finally stopped and said, God, I need help. And God's like, dude, I've been waiting this whole time for you. I wonder how many times we could avoid the pit if we're willing to stop and listen and sit quiet and pray. By the way, some of us find it hard to sit quiet and pray. Some of us have a hard time being still. We actually have ministries to help you practice this. We have centering prayer groups that meet in person, online. We have contemplative worship that meets next Sunday, I think, at 5 o'clock right here. A place to sit, less talky, more listening. A place to pray, to reflect, to listen to music, to share in Holy Communion. Try it out. But sometimes we need to get quiet in order to receive God's gift of healing and hope in the middle of our hurt. The one more thing I want to notice is that God always gives a second chance. Now, we're going to hear about this more next week. In verse 10, God did what? Probably not the deliverance Jonah was hoping for. But it was the deliverance he needed. He's vomited up on the dry land. And you know the best part is he finds himself the exact same place as he was in Jonah 1. God says, all right, Jonah, go to Nineveh, that great city. This time, we'll hear next week, this time it goes remarkably different. Don't get me wrong, Jonah still is the worst prophet ever. You're going to hear more about this next week. But if God can give Jonah, the worst prophet ever, another chance, I'm pretty sure God can give you and me another chance. Second and third and fourth and even 70 times 7 chances. Seems like somebody I know said that. By the way, anybody remember how many days and nights Jonah was in the belly of a fish? 3. It seems like in the Bible there was somebody else I know who was in Sheol, the grave, for 3 days. Who was that? Who? Jesus. And what happened on his 3rd day? He rose and had a new beginning. You know, we're going to share in Holy Communion. It's an invitation of that new beginning, the second chance. No matter where you find yourself, no matter how great things are going or how many dips you've had, no matter where you are or what you've done, know that God is always willing and ready, even in the middle of Sheol, even in the middle of the pit. God is there with you, working to care for you and protect you and to invite you to get up, to experience a new beginning, a new life. But sometimes it takes us a chance to sit and listen for God to speak.